Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allie Colton. I am a senior here at Iowa State University in animal ecology and political science. And I have been one of the managers for the online Iowa Caucus course that was spearheaded by Dr. Steffen Schmidt this past semester. We have three distinguished faculty members here with us today. We have Diane Bystrom, who is the director of the Carrie Chapman Catt Center for Women in Politics. Dr. Bystrom has 30-plus years of experience covering, working on, and studying political campaigns. We have Dr. David Anderson, who is going to be a panelist, and it looks like possibly our moderator as well. Here today, he is assistant professor here at Iowa State in political science, and he specifically researches voter behavior and the impact of media on political campaigns. We also have Max Shelley here with us, who is the chair of the political science department. Steffen Schmidt, or Dr. Steffen Schmidt, may or may not be Skyping in with us. It sounds like he might have got stuck with some weather, with the blizzard, sort of, that we had. He is a professor here at Iowa State in political science, in the political science department. I'm going to introduce David Anderson as our moderator.
Hi, everybody. Forgive me if I don't sound prepared, because the moderating thing is a little new to me today. But we're going to start talking about some of the big things that happened last night. Last night was a rather exciting caucus. I think some rather unexpected things happened. So we're going to start with the general things, and then we're going to drill down into some more tight, nitty-gritty particulars. And I think I'm going to pass it off to Mac first, and just ask you to discuss what happened on the Republican side. Big picture things, what happened, what were some big surprises?
Well, I don't know if it was a surprise exactly, but there was a very heavy turnout by Christian evangelicals basically voting on social issues, kind of platforms. And that's probably the single thing, more than anything else at any rate, that propelled Cruz to a victory. It was a little bit surprising that Cruz came out ahead of Trump because a lot of the polls have been indicating to the contrary. If I could put in a vote of confidence for a poll that the three of us happen to be involved in. We actually did predict that Cruz was going to win in our Iowa poll together with WHO-TV, so chalk one up for us. Most of the other polls are saying it opposite, so I've been using this online as bragging rights, so we got that right.
The only poll put out in the last 2 weeks to get it right.
Yes. We were off by a few percentage points, understand, but that's detail. So we definitely did it right. I think clearly Rubio has a lot of momentum coming out of this. He finished a relatively strong third, not that far behind Trump, and I don't think that helped the Trump campaign's, I don't know, swagger a whole lot. It was kind of curious. You probably are used to the Donald being very, very, very big, huge presence, right? He has a persona that just sort of never quits. Just ask him about it. And he was almost contrite, last night. He was almost like apologetically saying, well, I sort of said earlier that the only thing that matters is winning, and if I come in second here, if I don't win, then it's all a waste of time. He kind of literally did say that earlier. So I don't know if he feels that way exactly right now, but he did get a bit of a comeuppance, and we'll see if that carries over. New Hampshire's coming up pretty soon, a week from today. And the Donald's ahead by a pretty sizable margin there. But there probably will be some shrinkage, as there probably will be in the lead that Bernie Sanders has over Hillary Clinton in New Hampshire now. So there are some downstream consequences that will be important to watch. Otherwise, on the Republican side, we only had one official casualty. That's Huckabee, right, who's officially suspended. That means he's done with his campaign. There probably will be some other casualties in the near future, a few others of the ones that are still alive and kicking, but in like single digits in the Iowa results. They're not going to survive New Hampshire, or at least not very far beyond that. Someone like Trump won't have any problem sticking it out. Rubio is definitely on the rise, and Rubio seems to have been sort of anointed now as something of a, I don't know, savior almost for the Republican establishment, and whether that'll play out, don't know. But none of the other, with air quotes around the word establishment figures, Jeb Bush being the obvious case in point, seem to have really caught fire. I mean, Jeb has spent $60 million, if I have this right, already. He's got about that much money left from fundraising. One sort of background issue here is what happens to his leftover $50 or $60 million if he does drop out. I don't know if he would throw that at Rubio, maybe. It would be a quid for that quo, obviously, but that's one of the things you might want to watch for the kind of near-term future. On the Democratic side, this was the definition of a nail biter, I suppose. I think Dave has the exact percentages for Clinton and Sanders.
Yeah.
You want to read those off?
So as of right now, the numbers we have are that Hillary Clinton got 49.86% of the delegates, Bernie Sanders got 49.57%, and O'Malley got 0.57%. But that comes down to a delegate total of 699.57 for Clinton and 697.77 for Sanders, which means that out of about 1,400 delegates, there is a delegate and a half difference, a two-delegate difference almost. That's razor thin. Did we expect that?
Well, actually, I think the polling on the Democratic side was all over the place. And if you looked at the polls at the end, people, the Des Moines Register predicted Clinton to be the winner, again, within the margin of error. Then Quinnipiac came out the next day and predicted Sanders to be a winner. So I think the polling was telling us it was going to be a very close race, and it turned out to be a very close race. I called it just yesterday morning for Cruz and Clinton also in a panel, and I was razor thin on Clinton, I understand that, but anyway, I thought it would be about a 2% race, and early on when I was looking at the results, that was what was holding true for Clinton. But then it turned out to be as those late counties came in. And of course, the other thing that I finally went to bed, there were 12 precincts out last night when I finally went to bed. I just started thinking these are precincts that are not going to come in. And I think we can talk about this later, some kind of confusion and perhaps lack of training in some of the Democratic caucuses. The last precinct just came in, and that's what these numbers reflect. And it was a Polk County precinct, and I think if you're Clinton, because she won Polk County by 8 percentage points. So I think her confidence was that this is another Polk County precinct. It actually came in for Sanders by the 2-delegate difference. And so that's what swayed those final numbers. I think it's also kind of interesting to see kind of who turned out on the Democratic side. Their turnout was not as large. It was about a little over 170,000, so not the record 240 that came out in 2008. So a 70,000 difference, but still a good turnout. The other thing I think about it is that, Sanders was kind of looking for the same kind of coalition that Obama had in 2008, and it's a little bit different. In 2008, 17 to 29-year-olds comprised 22% of those who caucus, and this is based on either exit or entrance polls. What I have today is entrance polls. What we had then is exit polls. And this year it was just, it was 18% of the vote, so it was down 4%. But Sanders did very well with that group. He won 84% of that group. On the flip side, Hillary Clinton won 60% of caucus goers were 45 or over, and she carried them easily. And among the 65 and over group, she had more than a 2-to-1 advantage. Another thing that was talked a lot about, and actually the first-time caucus goers on both the Republican side and the Democratic side were surprisingly close. On the Republican side, it was 45%. On the Democratic, it was 44%. But again, that's down because in 2008, 57% of those who showed up to caucus for Obama were first-time caucus goers. But again, among those, Sanders had a 22-point advantage, and so he did really do well with first-time caucus goers. Meanwhile, of those who had caucused before, Clinton won 56% of those who have caucused before. So certainly the same kind of dynamics that you have there. Clinton also did well with middle-of-the-road Democrats, those who described themselves as moderates, but that share was down 12 percentage points from 2008. So there were more liberals in the mix, more people that identified themselves as very liberal, and those people went for Sanders. I guess my final thing I want to say, and I'm going to show a quick little map here. This is a map of how counties voted, and the dark squares are Hillary Clinton, and the lighter squares are Bernie Sanders. Now, if you look at that in here, and I think this is something moving forward where this is coming from, Clinton won 60 counties of the 99 counties, and Sanders won 39. But again, statistically dead heat. But it's interesting to look to see where they won them. Hillary Clinton won Polk County and all the surrounding suburbs. So that would be, all the suburbs, Warren, Guthrie, Madison, all the suburbs around there. She also won a lot of north central Iowa, south central Iowa, and so did well in those counties. In some of the rural counties, her victory was as much as 60% to 30%. And so again, but they're smaller rural counties. If you look at Sanders, and this is what everybody predicted, he won Story County big, and also Boone and Marshall, which also have, community colleges, but right next to Story County. He won Johnson County, that's where the University of Iowa is. Also Lynn County, which is slightly north of there, and the counties going toward Illinois in the Davenport-Muscatine area. He did well there. And so the other area that he won was Black Hawk County, which was UNI. And so he did do well in all of the college precincts. The last thing I want to say, and this is because I cover media coverage of women candidates, so I'm going to point out one thing that I just saw in crunching these, or looking at these statistics. In 2008, what was reported by the media? Hillary Clinton had a disappointing third place finish in Iowa. That's still the narrative today. I disagreed with the narrative at the time because in 2008, John Edwards had 29.7% of the delegates and Hillary Clinton had 29.5. That's a 2% difference. It's disappointing, isn't it? Today she won by 0.2%. We're not calling that a disappointing victory. I mean, again, I think if I was Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton coming out of here, they both have great news coming out of here. It is a virtual tie. The only thing I would say is it's disappointing to me to find her still framed as a disappointing third in Iowa when it's exactly the same percentage of victory or loss.
That's a good point. So I'm going to keep with you for a minute because you correctly predicted a Cruz victory yesterday morning.
Yes, I did. And Mac was there to witness it. Yeah.
So we have witnesses. Can you explain what you think went into that? What factors led?
Well, I was relying on our poll, Dave. I
Good
thought we had a
choice,
good
good
poll.
choice.
The other thing, I mean, I went to some caucus events over the previous weekend, as you did as well. I saw you there. And I also had a group of students visiting me this week from Emerson College, about 20, and about 18 from the University of Missouri, and they were also going to all these events and feeding back information on it. It seemed to me that Cruz did have a really good organization, which people predicted. And some of these students who went to the Cruz event, or to the Trump events, were reporting back to me, and again, these are students from other colleges, they were reporting back to me that they were asking people in the Trump crowds, are you going to caucus for Trump? And most of them say, no, I just showed up to this event. So I didn't think he had as good as an organization. I did think Rubio was rising, and I think he took some support back. The Rubio event that we attended, one of my friends attended it a weekend before, and she said there were 3 times as many people there. So I guess I bet on Cruz based on the fact that I thought he had a good organization. It also underscores, I think, on actually both races, that retail politics still matter in Iowa because Cruz ran a more traditional campaign. Rubio was here the last 8 days, so he made up for some lost time. And really among people who made up their decision at the end, Rubio won those voters over. So.
Very interesting. So Mac, coming in here, you said that there was a bit of a weirdness factor this year.
Well, there are several aspects to this, yeah. How many people actually went to the caucuses? So you probably have your own stories. Well, when I try to explain how the caucuses work to outsiders, somebody outside the borders of Iowa, I try to explain this isn't a system run by geniuses. It's very fallible, very human, and so just stuff happens, and you may have been witness to some of these things. So there was a report from the Sanders campaign that there were, I guess at one point they were suggesting there were 90 different Democratic precincts that didn't have an official chair. That turned out to be not true. I guess they all had a chair. But sometimes the chairs didn't report the information they were supposed to on time. Now, the Republicans had a somewhat similar problem in 2012, so it's not one party, is a culprit here. They kind of both are a little bit challenged arithmetically at times, or organizationally. And that's one of the reasons why we did have this very late reporting for the Democrats, which compounded things because it was razor thin and still is. And you might notice, if you remember the numbers that Dave rattled off, that if you just look at O'Malley's numbers, that easily makes up the difference between the 2 leading candidates. And so keep in mind that March 12th is the next level of this. Do keep in mind there are 4 tiers to this process. And March 12th is the next act. Those are the 99 county conventions. And there could be a resorting of the O'Malley people. And half of the delegate, I guess, for uncommitted. I don't know what a half of a delegate looks like exactly, but somebody's going to have to physically be there as a real person to represent that. So there's more weirdness ahead. Just thinking in terms of the fractionation of the delegates for the Democrats, that's sort of an oddity to begin with. We probably, well, I don't know, there's a lot of pressure now on the Democratic State Central Committee to report the actual number of people who voted for the candidates. I don't think they've really done that routinely before, but they have to have that information to be able to figure out the delegate equivalents and verify all that. So, I mean, the Sanders people are saying, I mean, who knows, that he may have won the popular vote, but lost the delegate count. And so one of the weirdness elements in a lot of elections, the way the Democrats do this in particular, with the caucuses, is that you don't get an exact translation of delegates to vote. It's not a one person, one vote. There are these delegate allocations, you know, which are based on previous attendance, not the current attendance, right? So you can have like attendance that's 2 or 3 times as big this year. It doesn't get you any more delegates, right? And so therefore the effect of, well, a surge, you know, in some precincts is just watered down that way. To me, that's a kind of weirdness, I guess. I actually think the Republican process is much smoother and much cleaner. That they did have trouble counting things, you understand, in 2012, but at least there you know exactly how many people voted for each candidate. And I just as an editorial comment, I kind of wish the Democrats would do that together with the delegate counts. I don't see why they want to have it be something of a mystery. Anyway, in terms of like other elements of weirdness, thinking again that there's, I think, 1.8 delegate equivalents separating Clinton from Sanders at this point, because I guess that's official. Do you understand that coin flips happened in half a dozen of these precincts? And so, trust me on this. I was just on WHO radio and sort of got the dope on this. They wanted me to explain what the probability was of this happening. So just understand, this is really weird. So understand the Democrats have a 70-page thick guide to how to do a caucus. It actually extends like to the National Convention. I don't think the Republicans have anything that detailed. I couldn't find anything online. It's like 1 page on a screen and that's it. So the Democrats have this amazingly convoluted detail to cover all sorts of contingencies, one of which is what happens when you have like a stray delegate that you can't figure out how to assign. And so one of the rules they have, I don't quite know why, is you flip a coin. So one case in point, there was one precinct, do you remember where it was?
It was the 2-4 in Ames.
Thank you, yeah.
And I know someone who was there.
Oh, okay, well, yeah, so you can speak to this directly.
at the
Well, okay,
2-4.
so you were there. So, but correct me if I misspeak, but I think that, you know, that they do this initial head count, and then there's a reaffiliation, non-viable groups. It kind of means O'Malley and maybe a handful of uncommitteds. We actually had one Biden person in our precinct, by the way. I don't know where that came from, but anyway. And so those folks who are not viable, they have to go somewhere else, right? Or go away. And apparently about 60 people left before that final count happened. Is that right?
Explanation.
Yeah.
But my counts, I was a precinct chair.
Okay.
For one of the campaigns. My counts showed that those 60 were missing all the way through every realignment.
Oh, okay.
So I suspect there was a miscount at the door.
Well, that's possible.
And that carried over. But
Okay.
then at the end, it's which total, the argument was which total do you take the delegate count out of?
Yeah.
I redid the math, and Hillary Clinton would have gotten that delegate either way.
Okay.
In my calculations, but they chose to call the state headquarters and did it.
Yeah, and so you were there for the coin flip, and I understand somebody for Hillary.
I was the one in the Des Moines Register.
Oh, I get it. Okay. So you called heads. Congratulations. Yeah. Well, and then so I got this call earlier today from WHO Radio, and they said, hey, what are the odds of this happening 6 times? It happened 6 times. And Hillary, whoever was representing Hillary, called it right all 6 times. Now, keep in mind there's a 1.8 delegate difference. 6 of Hillary's delegates came about through.
That's not right. Okay, I'll go.
Well, okay, you can correct me on that, okay. But this is one of the weirdness elements, so. I mean, these numbers are accurate, but there is a stuff.
I guess
in the
what I'm
background.
saying, again, maybe some of you that caucus all the time can explain this on the Democratic side, but this is what is in the Des Moines Register. It's not equivalent of a 1 delegate to a 1 delegate
Oh,
ratio.
understood,
It's
yeah.
because of all the delegates that are elected through this process, and there's thousands of them. It's actually, this is what the Des Moines Register said. The statewide delegate equivalents that determine the outcome on caucus night are derived from the county level delegates, but are aggregated across the state and weighted in a manner that makes individual county delegate selections at a handful of precincts count for a tiny fraction of the ultimate result. So what this article said in the Des Moines Register, I mean, it's not like he could have gotten 6 more delegates. It's 6 more delegates spread over thousands of people.
Which adds up to a fraction of a delegate
Fraction,
equivalent. Yeah,
yes,
that's
but it's
true.
still very
Yeah.
close.
Well,
But,
yes.
but, I mean, I think the confusion is that I've talked to several people today that are saying, oh, Sanders would have won because he would have gotten 6 more delegates, and that's not, and Jennifer, I mean, you probably know more about it too. So it's very much split over, and even this story said it was statistically insignificant, but it
Yeah.
is a very close race.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't want to walk away thinking that these 6 delegates, by just the flip of a coin, would have been in the total delegate count.
That's a great point, thank you. I also found on the weirdness coefficient side that cookies are a helpful way to attract people over to your side.
I saw a picture of you with cookies.
Yeah, I don't have plausible deniability on this. So my wife happened to do a shot. It's been on Facebook.
I saw it on Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. And so I was caught red-handed using a plate of cookies to induce people to come over to our side of the room, you understand. And, well, I mean, it worked. And it actually didn't make any difference in the delegate distribution, but it was kind of cute. Things like that go on, and we were trying to think of reasonable inducements, to try to get these folks who were cut loose because they weren't in a viable group to participate. That's kind of what does happen on the Democratic side of things. I don't know. I haven't seen Republicans use cookies as an inducement before. But
Nope, Ted Cruz kind of got in a little hot water towards the end of the campaign about using political science research to try to turn out voters. Diane, do you want to talk about that a little?
Why don't you talk about that?
All right. Well, so towards the end of the campaign, a bunch of Cruz supporters received a mailer that some people said looked like an official Secretary of State document saying you were a delinquent voter and you have a failing record of showing up to vote, and made it seem like the Secretary of State was grading voters on their participation and assigned either a C, D, or F grade to you and all of your neighbors in your voter turnout.
And unfortunately, one of our colleagues got an F.
Yes,
And put it
one
on
of our
Facebook.
colleagues did receive this, and
F.
he was given an F, as were all of his neighbors. And this is a campaign tactic that came out of political science research done by Alan Gerber and Don Green, who at that time were at Yale, and found out that a great way to motivate voters out is to tell them that their participation is public record, which it is. Nobody can ever know how you vote, but you can purchase voter records and determine if people turn out to vote. The Secretary of State, of course, does not keep voting records on caucusing. They only keep it on elections, which are run by the state. The caucuses are run by parties. But this mailer made it seem as if caucus participation was going to go into your grade, and after the caucuses, your neighbors would get updated information about whether you failed to attend, which not everybody likes. The fact is that research shows that kind of shaming people into participating is a very powerful inducement. It does shift the numbers of participation rates. Of course, every time this research has been tried before, it's been kind of blanket mailers, where you just mail everybody in an entire district and nobody in the next district, and you see if participation rates change, and then you say, well, it must have been because of the mailer. The Cruz campaign saw this. They have been very data-driven in this campaign cycle, and they said, okay, well, let's send out mailers to our supporters, which got him in a little hot water because some people felt that it was a little maybe unethical or not right to kind of shame your own supporters into going out to vote. And there was some controversy ahead of time about whether this would deter his voters. They would maybe be turned off and go to another camp. If you look at the turnout numbers, I think we have a big win for social science research. The Cruz campaign, I think all the evidence points to the Cruz campaign being fantastically well organized. They had a turnout system that was second to none this year. They overperformed almost all of the polling expectations. And some of it, I have to say, is probably due to that mailer. It was very successful. So,
and I just have one thing to add to that, because I was watching one of the stations this morning, and a Cruz guy was already in New Hampshire defending that, well, not so much defending the mailer. Paul Pate, who's a Republican Secretary of State, issued a statement about it. and said, Governor Branstad also said not to vote for Ted Cruz because of ethanol. So the person on there today is this outsider thing. So his campaign person was in New Hampshire saying, we won big in Iowa, and that's after the Republican, the traditional Republicans, they criticized our mailer. It was a politically motivated by the Secretary of State, and then the governor said not to vote for him, and so it had all this stuff. I'd also like to show this, this is on the Republican side. Steve King endorsed Cruz, and here's King's district, basically. The blue is Trump, and the orange is Cruz, and so we would say that maybe it didn't make as much difference with the endorsement. Kind of mixed up. And by the way, those green counties are the 5 Marco Rubio counties. Interesting, again, Polk County, Story County, Johnson County, Scott County, and I think Warren. So again, Rubio won the Republican vote in 2 of the university community counties.
It seems like Rubio, towards the end of the campaign, was really surging. Either of you want to talk about why that was? What did the campaign do? What shifted things?
Well, he had a lot of active support, clearly. I think Rubio's success and Cruz's success both attest to and Trump's failure, if you will, coming in second, all collectively attest to the role of the boots-on-the-ground kind of approach. It's organization, organization, and organization. Sort of classic retail politics that kind of won out over Trump's use of mass media and kind of large-scale events and not so much door-knocking or shoe leather. I think in addition, there's some degree of at least near desperation on the part of the Republican establishment to say, help, somebody come save us, to make sure that neither Cruz nor Trump actually gets a nomination. And I think it's possible that Rubio has sort of just been accepted by the establishment as their person to try to go into the list and tilt against the Trump and Cruz and see if he can win.
I would agree with that, and I mentioned a little bit earlier also that Rubio got the highest percentage of late deciders. So 35% of those on entrance polls last night said that they just made up their mind that day, and of that 35%, Rubio got 30% of that statistic. So he got the late deciders. The other thing I do in agreeing with Mac, when I went to the Rubio event last week at Sheeman, saw a lot of people I knew from Ames there, talked to some of them, and it was exactly that. They had, in some cases, been supporting other people, like Jeb Bush. They were supporting, in some cases, Carly Fiorina. They were supporting people like Chris Christie, and they started thinking that maybe what I need to do with my vote is more strategically vote for someone that, and at that time, we were already talking about Rubio in 3rd place. He almost won 2nd place. I mean, there was only about a percentage point between him and Donald Trump. So he was certainly surging, and I think is in pretty good place now going into New Hampshire. Of course, you've got people that have concentrated a lot of time there, like Jeb Bush and Chris Christie and John Kasich. But I think some of the people that were supporting some of these low-polling traditional candidates started thinking as Rubio as a strategic alternative.
And Rubio has been polling going way back, pretty well against Hillary and Bernie.
Yeah.
So, looked like a very strong option.
So both of you kind of brought up the idea that this is a big success story, I think, for retail politics this year.
I think so, yeah.
What about Marco Rubio's campaign? He got knocked that he wasn't spending enough time in Iowa.
It's really kind of funny because you and I talked about this weekend. I did an interview on NPR with the same group that they were doing it with, and one of the interviews I did is spectacle versus retail. And I mean, that NPR reporter certainly thought that Donald Trump was going to win, and that would be spectacle in the research. And so, I said we're not going to know that. And I'm just thinking that the retail, again, I predicted on NPR too that Cruz was going to win. But anyway, I think it was a retail situation, I think, for the Republicans. Now, it's interesting with Rubio, because you and I talked about that and talked about him doing more of a TV thing. He came in the last 8 days. Interestingly, this NPR kind of 6 things to take away that I've been referencing here says that Rubio ran a retail campaign. So that's kind of interesting, but that's what this said. It says retail politics still work in Iowa, and it cites Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. So he came here a lot. I guess what helped him is that Republicans were changing, the ones that hadn't made up their mind were making up their minds when he concentrated on the state for 8 days. And then he also ran the 30-minute infomercial. Did anybody watch that, the Rubio infomercial? Yeah, I didn't either. But, and that could have maybe played well with some of the supporters. I don't know. It seems like none of them watched it, though.
No, I think it's really interesting if you look at the polling results, you were referencing when people made up their mind. And for people who made up their mind more than I think a month ago, Trump wins.
Yeah.
For people who made up their mind between a month and a week ago, I think it was Cruz. And in the last week, it was Rubio. You kind of see a different effect based upon when people decided.
Yeah, the same thing from NPR says that 64% made up their minds much earlier, and Trump and Cruz got 30% each. So the Rubio people were in the last few days.
It's
So I
interesting.
mean, so I guess what happened of the people that were paying attention, and he was in the state, and he did a lot of events in his last 8 days here, and he spent a lot
Yeah.
of it on advertising.
He did.
The other thing I read, and another thing, is that he actually also, it might be the same article, he also took away in the evangelical vote. And so the evangelical vote was actually split 3 ways. So Cruz went into that, I don't know if you saw his last ad, Marco Rubio's, but it was about faith. And it was looking into the camera and talking about his faith. And so entrance polling are showing that he did take part of that evangelical vote. So it was split 3 ways, but Cruz won the most of it.
I don't know who's running Rubio's TV ads, but I think they're brilliant.
I believe it's the same person that ran Joni Ernst, that's what I heard.
That person has a future ahead of them. I think the ad that Rubio has been showing for all the NFL playoff games of him with a football is the most candid, charismatic political ad I've ever seen. It's hard to watch that ad and not walk away saying, I like him. I don't know what he stands for because he didn't talk about it in this ad, but I like him. And then always, within 30 minutes, he hits you with a policy spot, where then he's talking tough on foreign policy or domestic policy, and it is honestly, I think, brilliant because it softens you up. You see him in a very candid interaction. He's joking. He's even dropping the football, so he's a human being. He's not perfect. And then he hits you later on where he talks tough on foreign policy, and it kind of, I think, makes everybody a little bit more susceptible to listen to him. Normally, I would say TV ads are not going to work in Iowa. People want to meet the candidates here. They want to talk to you one-on-one. I think Rubio proved that not always to be the universal truth here. He had some great ads, and hearing that it was the person who did Joni Ernst's ads makes sense because they understand Iowa. It's not bringing in a national campaign. It's bringing in an Iowan. That makes a lot of good sense. So moving on, what do we expect in New Hampshire? Do you want to make predictions, Mac? Who should we be looking at in New Hampshire?
Well, I think the prohibitive favorites for sure now, and if we're only a week out, are Sanders and Trump. And I think what's going to happen is that they're both ahead by about 30 points in a lot of the polls. I mean, it looks like it's going to be a blowout. I think Hillary's going to get a little bit of momentum out of Iowa. Sanders can claim he fought her to a standstill, which is also true. But she can legitimately say she won, but I guess with quotes around the word, fair enough. And that gives her a little bit of momentum. So I would imagine it's kind of normal anyway for these giant gaps to shrink anyway. And so I imagine that Sanders will wind up winning by something in maybe the 20-point range. Trump, I think, is a bit more on the skids. He has to be more careful. He still has a very healthy lead, but he's going to have to worry about Cruz, except that, let's see if I get these numbers right. Iowa, we had 64% of the Republican attendees self-identified as evangelicals or born again. I think the number is about a third that, about 22% is the last number I saw out of New Hampshire. So Cruz has much less of a depth of that base of support available in New Hampshire. So I would predict he wouldn't do particularly well. And I would watch out for Rubio. I think he's got a very good chance of coming in a relatively close second.
I agree with Mac in the sense I think that Trump and both Sanders are going, right now are predicted to win New Hampshire. I think the latest poll I saw on Clinton Sanders, it was 20 points, and it was at least that or a little bit more on the other side. But again, I think another thing that's going to occur in the next week is both the Republicans and Democrats have a debate. And so, at first Bernie didn't want to really agree to this debate. Now I bet he's glad he did, because I think, debates, do inform, particularly your partisans, but also can make up a few minds. And so I think the debates could have an impact on it. Trump is not a strong debater. Both Cruz and Rubio are. The other thing I've seen in Cruz's narrative lately, and he started doing this in Iowa, but he's doing it much more in New Hampshire, is that he's now campaigning to courageous conservatives. not the compassionate conservatives that George W. Bush was, but courageous conservatives. And I see that as people that are willing to break the mold, maybe not go along with the party. But so again, I think he'll have some appeals to conservatives in New Hampshire. But I think Rubio's on the rise there. I don't know what's going to happen with, Chris Christie was on TV today blasting Rubio, and I think that's another thing that people are speculating, that every time that Trump kind of sets his rhetoric at somebody, it works for a while. And so maybe the next, maybe he regrets not being as too nasty to Marco Rubio, so maybe he'll find something about Marco Rubio to, so again, Trump has been fairly successful with damaging people, primarily because of all the media attention he gets. But maybe that will decrease a little bit now that he's been a little bit wounded in Iowa. So, Bernie Sanders, the other thing I read at 538 the other day is that they did a ranking of all the states by the percentage of white liberals in their Democratic population. The number 1 state is New Hampshire. The number 2 state is Iowa. And so both of those states look very good demographically for Bernie Sanders on that side. And, but New Hampshire voters are very independent. They go into a primary, but Republicans can go vote for Democrats, Democrats can vote for Republicans, independents can go either way. And sometimes New Hampshire voters are rather strategic about what they want to do. Maybe they're Democrats, but maybe they want to go vote for a Republican or vice versa. So, but I think that they'll win.
It's going to be fun to watch. So I think one of the big questions still left here is how quickly can one of the establishment candidates kind of emerge? And that seems like it's going to take other establishment candidates, Christie, Kasich, Rubio's in there, Jeb Bush dropping out. Do you think clearly Rubio is going to stay in for a while. He's got a pretty good incentive right now. What do you think it would take to convince Christie or Kasich or Bush to drop out in New Hampshire?
Well, really getting drubbed badly in New Hampshire, I think that would be the handwriting on the wall. Cruz can live to fight another day pretty easily in South Carolina. He'd have natural base of support there, and obviously Hillary does too. Christie, you've got an outsized ego. It's not quite Trumpian, but sort of getting there. And I think it would take some, some careful talking with his family to try to convince him that enough's enough. But I don't think that'll take very long. If he doesn't finish top 4 at any rate in New Hampshire, I would say he's done.
Yeah, I agree that I think the candidates that see themselves as mainstream Republican candidates really have no reason to drop out right now. You want to find out what happens in New Hampshire, and then some of them might even hang around for South Carolina and the SEC primary states. But I think the one I'm surprised hasn't dropped out yet is Rick Santorum, who finished even lower than Mike Huckabee last night. And then, as we haven't mentioned before, but Governor O'Malley dropped out as well on the Democratic side. So I just don't think they have an incentive right now, especially if they've got some PAC money and they can still be in the race. So I think it'll be after we have the Super Tuesday that people will reevaluate their campaigns.
So we'll have a very split Republican electorate until after Super Tuesday.
I think so.
Should be interesting.
Well, just very quickly on that point, so after Super Tuesday, I think the Republicans are pretty much all winner-take-all selections.
Yeah,
and so, well, if you haven't been able to get on the radar screen by then, you really are done.
And the other thing to mention that we haven't talked about is that the delegate process also involves superdelegates, and so these are party regulars. And so right now, I think I saw this morning that Clinton has 296 and Bernie Sanders has 29 or something like that in that count. So that's a big deal as well. Now, Hillary Clinton also had a good superdelegate count in 2008, but it started as Obama won more, that started dissipating a little bit as well. The other thing I see in Hillary Clinton going forward, and she already laid this out last night, is to talk about we need to find didn't say it this way, but we need to think about the future of the Democratic Party. Well, of course, that is, Bernie Sanders has not been has registered as a Democrat. He's running as a Democrat, but he's been registered as an independent. So I think she's kind of calling out now, which might serve her well in some of these, especially starting in South Carolina, appealing to what do we think the future of the Democratic Party is. And so that might be another thing. But I do think that Sanders and Clinton will continue to run a basically positive campaign. One thing that I think you see there is that in the Des Moines Register poll, 82% had a favorable opinion of Sanders, 81% of Clinton. I was asked last night when I was on Channel 5 about why weren't they running negative ads, and they both have ads that have subtle negative attacks, but they're really pretty nice. And actually, Bernie Sanders was very nice last night in talking about Secretary of State Clinton. She was a little bit more feisty, but again, I think that they'll continue to run because they have to.
Yeah.
I think they'll continue to run a very positive campaign against each other, and we're going to see more fighting and anger and negative ads in the Republican race.
I think that's a big open question about whether, once we get past the primaries, whether the Republican Party can kind of heal its wounds. Cruz, Trump, and Rubio right now are drawing largely different sets of supporters, and they're not getting along very well right now. And at some point, the party's got to start healing those wounds and coming together before we get into the general election. It's something to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we start turning this over to public questions? If you have any questions, can you just come up to the central microphone? Don't all jump at once. Line up nicely.
Oh, come on, Amy.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Can I just stand up and talk, or do you want me in front of the mic?
Well, probably in front of the mic because
Okay.
this is being taped.
All right.
Yeah. Good idea. You're doing an excellent job as moderator.
Hey, thanks.
I'm Amy Erica Smith, and I'm a faculty member in political science, and my religion and politics class is here. Since my religion and politics class is here, let's talk about religion.
Okay.
For a moment. It's clear that evangelicalism is playing a big role on the Republican side. In all kinds of ways. We have endorsements, we have subtle cues being directed towards evangelicals. Is religion playing a role at all on the Democratic side?
I'm going to argue not much right now. At least I don't think we see any evidence of it. If you listen to Clinton and Bernie Sanders talk, they don't reference religion very often. It's not a rhetorical tool that the Democrats tend to rely on as much as the Republicans do.
I'm going to reference, I edited a book that came out on the 2014 election, I think it was, or 2000, I'm trying to remember what election, 2008. It's called Alienation, the Divide, and it was a play on words, Alienation, the Divide and Conquer election of 2008, so that's what it was. There was an interesting chapter there by one of my colleagues who does research on the political communication end of religion, and he will argue that religion always plays a role. And what he found that year with Obama is that, and I think there's going to be a point in this election where that is playing out to the African American churches. So at some point in time, I think we might see that in the Democratic race, because that's a huge organizing factor within that community. And I think we'll see more of it starting in South Carolina with, again, reaching out to African American churches. And because of that, sort of talking about religion in general, going to prayer breakfasts, doing things. And it usually doesn't start until, further into the campaign than it does for the Republicans, because they're relying on the evangelical vote. For example, one thing I'd throw out here, the evangelical self-identified voter in Iowa is only 28% of our population. So you can see even how overrepresented they are on the Republican side. And so evangelical, and there's apparently a lot of evangelical voters in South Carolina, but also the African-American churches are a big thing there. So I think we're going to start seeing Hillary Clinton talking more about at least reaching out to the African-American community through religion and churches.
Interesting.
I certainly agree, but
Huh?
And not Bernie Sanders.
Well, he might. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Clinton, I think is she a lifeline Methodist or Presbyterian? I mean, she comes Methodist, yeah. And I don't even know about Bernie Sanders. I think he's Jewish,
Jewish,
yeah.
Jewish,
I think
yeah.
he's Jewish, yeah. So, yeah, so.
I think Hillary, it's a little bit easier to predict what she's going to do because she was a part of Bill Clinton's campaign, of course, when he ran for president. So it'll probably look something similar to that. Bernie Sanders, I have no idea.
well, it may not be about religion directly, more maybe the lack thereof, but there is this increasing secularization, and it's still a distinct minority in the country, but that is kind of a group that Sanders is trying to appeal to.
And
So
those were big supporters of Obama in both 2008 and 2012. He won the sort of non-secular section. So I guess I would say religion always makes a difference. But it's how you define religion, which can be
That's
all
right.
over the spectrum, from non-religious to very religious. Yeah.
Not a question, just
Is it
a
a mic check? Is that what that was?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a question sort of for Diane. We were talking about it before we left the office. I'm kind of a political junkie, so I stayed up way too late last night watching all the speeches and all the commentary, and I watched Cruz's speech, I watched Trump's speech, I watched Hillary Clinton's speech, I watched Bernie Sanders' speech, and they all used loud voices. They were all very enthusiastic, and yet the press, not just the male press, the female people in the press as well, declared Hillary Clinton as giving an angry speech. And I'd just like to hear your comment, all of your comments on that portrayal, because I saw plenty of anger and vigor from the other candidates as well.
We've already seen that in this cycle. There's been news stories that have occurred where people will say things on the Democratic side with the same amount of excitement and vigor, and Hillary Clinton is described as angry, and the other ones are passionate, or they're described in very, and I don't have that in front of me, but I have talked about it before, and I have examples of it. And so there's different adjectives that are used to describe how Hillary Clinton, and oftentimes she is described as angry, where there was one event, it was probably the Jefferson Jackson Day dinner, I think I'm thinking of, and where they all gave a speech, and they were all very, I wasn't at it, but they were all very animated and enthusiastic. But Clinton, in several stories, was described as being angry, and Bernie, and the rest of them were passionate, and when they were kind of the same. And so, there still is different expectations, I think, in the media coverage. Every single study that I'm aware of that studied the 2008 campaign found that Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin, by the way, received both coverage that was overwhelmingly negative, focused more on their image than their issue statements, focused more on the horse race, and focused in many cases, on just describing them, personally in negative terms. In some cases, Sarah Palin was over-sexualized by the media. Caribou Barbie comes to mind, what she was described as by Maureen Dowd. And then Hillary Clinton was masculized. She wasn't quite feminine enough. And so all the studies from 2008, again, that I'm aware of, and there was numerous, and it was all sorts of media coverage. It was media coverage from newspapers, media coverage from TV, and media coverage on blogs, which was particularly gross and damaging. So that's kind of, I think it's less this year. I don't think there's as much of it that I'm seeing right now, just anecdotally. Of course, we're going to study that, but I do think I have anecdotal evidence that she is described in those terms. She is also still talked about by her age, her face, her hair, and so was Carly Fiorina. I mean, she didn't get, and so they both were. It seems a little less right now, but it hasn't gone away. You guys want to say anything?
No, I defer to you. So.
Agree with what you said.
I'm Larry Kierson. I went to the Martin O'Malley event in the Union here in front of a very small group. He seemed like he was very relaxed and probably knew something that he wasn't telling the group at that time. But I came away, and I have seen all of the other candidates on the Democratic side and many on the Republican side. But after hearing his message yesterday and seeing his presence and just the way he carried himself, I came away wondering, why did Bernie Sanders take off the way that he did, and Martin O'Malley got absolutely zero traction?
She's been in the White House. She's been in a governor's house, not as an elected official, but as a first lady. She's been in the Senate. She's been Secretary of State, so she has foreign policy experience. You just can't beat that experience. So as a governor, when Martin O'Malley tried to run as, I'm a governor, I've gotten things done, and it just pales next to Hillary Clinton. Like, yes, you have some domestic state-level experience in a rather small state. Okay, what's next? So then Martin O'Malley tried to talk about he's a liberal. He is a true liberal. He advocates liberal ideas. And honestly, if you look at Democratic candidates for president in the last 30 years, we have not had many strong liberals. Most people kind of run against liberalism. They don't talk about it very much. They'll say they're a liberal, but they don't really back it up with many ideas. And then we have Bernie Sanders, who is happy to say, I'm a democratic socialist, which turns people's heads. You haven't heard someone say that and run for office in, 50 years, maybe 100, which just sucks all the air out of the room, I think, for Martin O'Malley. He's looking for that area where he can say, I am better than both candidates. He's not proposing change more than Bernie Sanders is. Bernie Sanders has him totally outclassed there. He doesn't have more experience or credentials than Hillary Clinton, totally outclassed there. And I think he just came into a presidential cycle where there's no room for him. I think in other cycles he would have done much better, not this year.
I think he's just, is he 53?
He's young.
I mean, I think he'll have some, I mean, people think, I mean, that he'll still have.
He'll live to fight again.
Yeah,
And
he'll
I don't know,
I
he
think
may start be involved in the chatter for vice presidential possibilities or
I don't think he
something
would be
else.
on either side. He doesn't really bring
doesn't,
anything to the ticket on either side, I don't think.
I think the big challenge for Martin O'Malley is, what do you do now? He could run for Senate if there's an opening in his state, which I don't think there will be. But going from governor, you can't really run for the House of Representatives. The governors don't do that. You can't go to the state house and get a lower appointment. It's almost kind of sad that as a governor, the pinnacle of politics in your state, unless the Senate opens up and you want to go to the Senate, your options are really limited. And one of the things I think we were learning about Jeb Bush this cycle is, even as a former governor of a very important state who did a very good job as governor, if you spend 8 or 10 years in the wilderness, not involved in politics, it's really hard to jump back in. I think Jeb Bush has just shown he's kind of rusty on the campaign trail. He's not used to going out there and campaigning, and Martin O'Malley's probably going to face the same problem.
I think the future of Martin O'Malley, if a Democratic candidate does win the White House, is perhaps with a cabinet position.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that could be part of it. And he has some things he's especially interested in, I think the environment and energy.
Environment, I think transportation.
And so I think he could end up, again, if a
And gun
Democrat,
control.
huh? And what?
Gun control also.
Okay, yeah. So I think he could end up as in a cabinet position, especially if he waits a while and then he, of course, endorses somebody. But I mean, obviously he'll be working for. He endorsed Hillary Clinton, by the way, in 2008.
Okay.
And so, but and what I heard, and you can kind of share. I mean, I heard there was a lot of speculation where the O'Malley voters were going to go if he was not viable. And what I heard from in-person accounts of people and also Facebook accounts, they either tended to be split, or I know in the precinct that my husband caucused in last night, there were 14 of them in on the first realignment, all but 2 went to Clinton.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
that's what I saw last week.
yeah, and so that's kind of an interesting piece too, and that's something that we haven't talked about. Where did the O'Malley supporters are very small in New Hampshire, but where do they go?
Right.
And some of them may go to Clinton, tightening that up.
Well, and if you think about what happened to, or has been happening to governors on the Republican side, they haven't fared very well either. So it hasn't been a real good year for them across the board.
No.
No.
So their establishment, without sort of having the power base that a Clinton does, to be the establishment and be successful.
Yeah, and Chris Christie was my governor. I used to live in New Jersey, and looking at his future, it's a big question. Where is Chris Christie going to go? He is not suited for the Senate. It's not the area that he's going to fit in very well,
Not great collaborative
which means you have a man who's a very skilled politician. He is both good campaigning and he's good in governance, but he's got nowhere to go now. I think he's got to be hoping for an appointment to the Attorney General's office if the Republicans win, but if not, I really don't know where Chris Christie is going to wind up. Yes?
As the Republicans and Democrats continue to shake out, what do you think of the possibilities of someone like Mike Bloomberg joining the party?
Great question.
Another independent candidate that might actually affect either one of the 2 main parties?
Either of you want to jump in?
Well, he's worth, what, maybe 5 to 10 times as much as Donald Trump is. So
Yeah.
he's got, if you think Trump has money, I mean, multiply that in order of magnitude, and you've got what Bloomberg could contribute. And I think Bloomberg literally could write a check for $1 billion. Trump couldn't. His money's in real estate. That's said half in jest, but the obvious point is that someone with that amount of finance and a fairly decent track record as a mayor in New York City, I mean, that's not too shabby, winning in a very heavily Democratic city. And he has fairly, not really progressive, but I guess a successful track record in that regard. So he's held elective office, came out of it in reasonably good shape, and certainly has infinite numbers of dollars he could contribute. And he's very well known.
Yeah.
He says, the latest I've heard, he says he would only jump into the race if Trump and Sanders were the nominees. And so that's one thing that he says. The other thing is that they've already polled on it, and hypothetically, if he did jump into the race, he would take more votes away from Sanders than he would for Trump. And I think his overall ground game is probably more anti-Trump than anti-Sanders. So I don't think that Bloomberg would get in if he thought that that would give the election. I mean, I don't think he can win as a third-party candidate. And so it just, so then he has to factor in where he takes the votes away from. And it seems to be on the Democratic side and not on the Republican side if it's a Trump-Sanders race. So I don't think he'll do it under that. And of course, Hillary Clinton has, her response is he doesn't need to worry about it because she's going to win the nomination. So, and her politics are somewhat similar to his, I would think, in some ways. I mean, he's probably less progressive on some, although he's really big on gun control, which is Hillary's big issue, and so very progressive on gun control.
He's more socially liberal, but otherwise I think they're...
Yeah. They're both from New York.
So I had a very fun conversation yesterday talking about this exact issue, spinning out various scenarios, and me and my colleague came up with kind of a horror story of what if Donald Trump lost last night, this is before the returns came in, and I thought it would be possible to see him stand up and say, you know, I lost to Cruz because the establishment didn't support me, they cheated me. They somehow cheated me out of my win because I was going to take Iowa. I'm declaring I'm an independent presidential candidate right now, and he puts himself on the ballot in all 50 states. This would wound the Republican Party very badly. But then, spin this out a little bit farther, maybe Marco Rubio wins, and conservatives say, you know what, we're tired of supporting rather moderate candidates. And Ted Cruz, who has no love for the Washington establishment, decides he's an independent candidate. Now, the Republican Party is fractured badly, but you can see Trump drawing support from working class union workers, which hurts the Democratic candidate. Maybe people see this happening and they say, you know, we don't have to go with Hillary. Maybe this is the chance to get a real liberal elected. Maybe Bernie Sanders does well. And in this case, maybe Michael Bloomberg scratches his chin and goes, all right, the electorate is split in 4 or 5 different ways right now. I don't need 40% of the vote. I need 30% of the vote, and that will give me a plurality over the other candidates. And suddenly we could have 4 or 5 different candidates running for president as a Republican nominee, a Democratic nominee, 3 different independents. It would be total and utter chaos. It's possible. I would give it a 2% chance of happening, but boy, would that be fun. Not necessarily for the eventual outcome, because we would elect a president with maybe 30% of the popular vote, and that's a terrible solution. But it'd be fun to watch as a political scientist until I had to live under that regime.
So my question's really more for clarification and information rather than future ideas. Obviously, everybody's kind of got an opinion, and all the articles you read online are slightly slanted. I read a lot about this morning about the Polk County incident with Hillary Clinton. Apparently, people are saying that she committed voter fraud. Is there any actual basis for that, or is that all just internet insanity?
I haven't even seen that.
Yeah, I haven't heard the Hillary Clinton voter fraud part.
I mean,
okay, I'll trust that that's...
I mean, what have you, I mean, how...
Can you fill us in on that?
From what I have read from articles posted on social media is that from video evidence that C-SPAN has posted and all this kind of not that great stuff, she was talking about some missing votes, and then the votes appeared on her side after the recount, and a lot of people aren't happy, and I don't know if it's just because they're Sanders supporters and it's very thin margin, or if there's actually some sort of issue with the Democratic caucus process.
Are these by reputable journalists, or are these like blogs, or, I mean, is this like you read it in the New York Times or the Des Moines Register and it happens to be online, or, I mean, there's a lot, I'll just tell you this, there's a lot of misinformation
right,
that you
and I was
read.
just wondering if there was any legitimate information.
I don't know, I haven't heard that, but the caucus process on the Democratic side is very complex and somewhat convoluted, and really what happens, and then Jennifer can add more to it, is that people register at the door. Then they do these initial counts. The people doing the counts are the campaigns. Last night, I will say it was disorganized where my husband went because no one was in charge of it. And suddenly Jeff Johnson, who's our alumni director at Iowa State, and my husband, who's one of our legal counsel, were counting the ballots. And so they counted the ballots, and they counted it on the, they were at the Clinton side, they counted on the Sanders side. And then when they came up, they had 9 more votes than they had people who registered. So they recounted and found out where those votes were, and they adjusted it. And so that's the kind of stuff that can happen. I will tell you, one of my, a very ardent young man that I've known since he was actually my babysitter a long time ago when I lived in Oklahoma, he's very much a Clinton fan. He sent me this long message about watching something on C-SPAN where he thought Bernie Sanders people were doing the exact same thing. He said, I saw this thing and they counted and they added a person because he was up front, but then when they went up front, they added the person in twice, so they counted him twice. And I explained the same thing to him. I sent him a long message back and said, this is how it's supposed to work. You know, you count and you try to reconcile the count. So if they had one more person, it should have been reconciled. Jennifer, can you add anything to that?
Transparent process so that unless people actually leave, they're still there. And
Yeah.
If each campaign has the people that they're supposed to have in place there, you're all watching, you're all counting, you're counting your own people. In my mind, it would be really hard to cheat at a Democratic caucus. Simply because everybody's watching you. You know where your neighbor is sitting and standing.
And I think that's what you might be seeing is that, you know, like I said, it also happened, you know, on the Clinton-Sanders side, is that it's kind of a messy process. But if people don't leave, and that's the problem that happened with these flipping the coins, either people left or, like Jennifer said, the number was wrong at the beginning. They got a miscount at the beginning. And there's really no, I mean, I don't know how you solve that. So in Iowa, we solve it with a coin flip. It doesn't sound like a great way, but I don't know how else to do it. If you can't rectify the numbers, what do you do?
Yeah, there are rules and procedures for how to, if you have a, you know, the numbers not matching in the specific scenario of my precinct, that it appeared that the rules didn't cover that specific scenario, which I disagree with.
One very quick point about numbers. So the Microsoft, as you may know, partnered with both the state central committees to develop apps. At the caucuses you attended, did you see the apps actually used? At my site, I asked the people in charge, and they said basically, what app? They had no training in this, no knowledge at all.
Our chair did not use the app that I saw. They were manually calculating.
Well, yeah, that's what we had to do too.
And then they called it in.
Yeah.
And that last missing precinct today, I read a story about that in the Register. They finally found the last missing precinct. The story with that is that they walked into this precinct, which is in Polk County. Nobody would volunteer to be the temporary chairman. Somebody's neighbors got pulled into it, and he really didn't want to do it. He was really just there to caucus. He's never done it before, but he took charge of it because no one else would do it. So he did it, but then he didn't understand what he was supposed to do with calling in his vote. And so he didn't know anything about the app because he hadn't been trained, because he wasn't even thinking he was going to do this. So then he sees the paper this morning and sees that there's this missing precinct, and it's his precinct. So the other thing is that he tried to call the hotline, and the hotline was shut down. So he actually tried, he took off work today to try to go down to the Democratic County headquarters in Polk County to report it, and he finally did. But again, it was nothing, you know, nothing that he was trying to do. I mean, to try to conceal the results, he just didn't know what he was supposed to do.
Well, I just have one more question. There's a lot of young people in the room. There were a lot of new young voters in my precinct, and also older voters for the first time, registering to vote, partaking of the caucus. So my question is, how as a society do we keep them engaged? Because I think what happened in 2008, Obama got this great coalition of young voters. They were new, they came in, and then in 2010 midterm elections, they were gone. They didn't show up. And so it's not just showing up to vote, but it's being the volunteers. At my precinct, the average age of the volunteers running the caucus, let's put it this way, I was one of the youngest volunteers there, and I'm no spring chicken. So how do we get young people interested and involved in being part of the process, not just be vote?
Well, as someone who's tried to do this for 20 years, it's an uphill battle. The Harry Chapman Cat Center, even though we focus on women in politics, we also focus on youth voters. And so we've been working for 20 years to register voters, to get them to vote in Ames. I've got students working for me with they're with the Andrew Goodman Foundation and getting scholarships, and they're working through the Cat Center on voter engagement. And they're committed for an extended amount of time, and so it's students really engaging them. We also have the CEEP, that's the Campus Election Engagement Project. They're now active in the state since 2014, and they've placed some interns at the Cat Center as well. So what we found out is trying to get students to engage student is a good way to do it. I would say, just from what I heard about the caucuses last night, and including the Republican caucuses, there was a great turnout of young people, particularly in the college communities. And so I think that's a real success story. Now, the next challenge is keeping them active and involved. And it is an uphill battle. And you've got to just kind of ignite a spark in them. I saw on Facebook last night some of my friends that were posting from Polk County where they actually had elected young delegates to go to the county convention. And so I think that's one thing that the parties can do, you know, even though if it's the older ones controlling the party, trying to get these young people to step up and actually be delegates at the next step is another good idea.
So I think if you look at surveys of youth for the last generation, when they ask, why don't you participate, the number one reason most young people say they don't participate and get more active in politics is that they say they don't know how. This is a soapbox issue of mine, is that as a society, all schools in America used to teach civics because we wanted to train citizens. And that was the ethos behind public education. We needed to grow citizens. And we got away from that. As a society now, we try to train workers. And workers don't need to be able to vote. So we don't do some very simple things like teach 17-year-olds how to go to a precinct and vote, or in Iowa, how to go to a precinct and caucus, which is a huge deterrent because now you're putting it on them to figure out how to do this themselves and also find a reason why they should. This kind of abstract notion of civic duty. Someone's got to teach you that. Nobody's born just wanting to participate in politics. You have to learn kind of that you're in a society, that we're all in this together, democracy matters. And until we teach people this, they're not going to figure it out on their own. I also think part of the problem is the political system right now is that, you know, since young people don't vote, since they don't participate, nobody talks about their issues. Why did people come out for Bernie Sanders? Because he's talking about student loans and student debt. And suddenly 18 to 22-year-olds are snapping their heads around going, really? That's something that really affects me. And with, honestly, right now with the student debt issue, that's affecting everybody under 35, maybe 40, who are saddled with incredible debt, and the parties don't talk about it because it's a young issue. And frankly, I mean, you look at the big issues that mobilize voters out, Social Security, Medicare. Why? Because those are issues that pertain to older Americans who are very reliable voters. You talk about those issues, you bring out your supporters, you talk about student loans, education, you're not guaranteed to get much attention, so we just don't bother. We would need big systemic changes to bring out young people, and it's becoming a generational problem, that once you deter 18 to 24-year-olds from participating this cycle, well, they're not likely to participate the next cycle because they have no experience, and that just exacerbates over time. I don't have a solution, though. Change society and teach civics.
If you voted, if you caucused last night, stay involved.
Yes.
For me, you know, for all of us, stay involved.
Any other questions? We'd love to field them. One more.
I just got one quick question.
Shoot.
Who do you think will benefit the most on the Republican side from candidates like Kasich and Gilmore and Santorum dropping out?
Gilmore, I'm glad you mentioned Gilmore. Yes. Gilmore got 12 votes in Iowa last night. I want to meet these 12 people. One of the stories that I was hoping somebody would finally pick up is that about a week before the caucuses, Jim Gilmore registered 1% in a poll. Most polls weren't even asking about Jim Gilmore. I want to know who's supporting Jim Gilmore because he has no campaign. My answer is I think Marco Rubio will benefit from just about everybody who drops out. He is the second choice of most of the people who are getting single-digit numbers, and I think as other Republicans start dropping out, you will see Marco's numbers rise and rise and rise. The big question in the Rubio campaign right now, I think, should be how quickly can we get everybody out? Because if all the other candidates hang in till after Super Tuesday, you know, you may have Cruz or maybe Trump having established dominance in the polls. And then suddenly Marco becomes very viable after Super Tuesday, but a third of the ballgame's already over. And then he's got to come from behind. The delegate situation makes it complicated, but voters don't always pay attention to delegates. And then we start talking about things like a contested convention, which political scientists think is thrilling. The rest of America, not so much. Do you want to add to that, Mike?
Well, I would agree that I think Rubio is the one most likely to benefit, again, because the people we're talking about sort of chasing away from the hunt for the nomination, they're pretty much all establishment-type figures. But if you added their numbers together, it's not enough to put Rubio over the top. So he needs to do a lot of conversion as well. And he was doing okay, I think, in sort of eating into some of the evangelical base. But, and he'll be able to do a lot more of that in South Carolina this year.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right, well, unless we have anybody rushing up to the mic, thanks everybody for coming. This has been fun, and hopefully we'll see you back here in 4 years.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.